Our guest today on Transition Talks is Than Merrill, a former collegiate and professional football player. Than enjoyed a diverse football career, playing collegiately from coast to coast, professionally playing all over the world, and also achieving the rare accomplishment of being an Ivy Leaguer taken in the NFL draft. After football, he entered into the real estate industry where he focused on acquiring, developing, and selling properties. He has started several companies, has authored a book, started a television series, and is an accomplished speaker. Than Merrill, welcome to Transition Talks, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I look forward to sharing any sort of insights that I might have.
Yeah, and want to talk on your career for a moment. And you had a little bit of a unique collegiate experience where you started out at Stanford and you ended up at Yale. So just want to kind of hear from you. Obviously, it seems like the importance of academics was kind of one of the driving factors in your collegiate decision. So just kind of talk about that importance of academics as you were growing up and making your college decisions.
My parents absolutely ingrained in me the importance of getting the best education that you can. I don't ever remember any other conversation since, I was 5, 6 years old. It was all about, get into the best school that you can by any means that you can. And so that was ingrained in the way I think, and it's the same advice I'd give to my kids today is leverage whatever skills or tools you have, from music to athletics to anything that can help you, get into the best school that you can. I think it gives people, a great advantage in life. And so for me, it was what institutions can provide that quality of an education, and where can I fit in athletically? And because of that, I ended up, playing at Yale and loved it, and had a great experience there.
You had the ability to have success at Yale, be drafted. You played in the NFL and in NFL Europe, and just kind of talk to us about kind of the end of your career.
Sure.
You had this professional career, and was it something that you anticipated, or what was it kind of forced upon you?
It was a little of both. I was one of those guys that was always going to be on the bubble, competing every year to make the team, and I ended up getting hurt. Ended up having 2 surgeries on my knee, and I started to see the writing on the wall, and I realized that somebody who has 2 knee surgeries, who's a bubble guy anyway, is, how much longer are you going to be able to play? And so I started, during my rehab, that's when I really started that transition thought process and planning, and starting to think about the next chapter of my life. And every athlete goes through this, whether it's an injury or whether it's somebody's forced out because they're bringing in a younger player, or if it's somebody's getting towards the end of their career. And, luckily I'll say I had a lot of time. I had about 9 months of essentially rehab. And during that 9-month period, while I was going to rehab a couple hours a day and still training, that's when I started to really prepare myself for the next chapter of my life and the business and real estate investments that we've made over those years. But, so it was interesting, because it was a blessing, because I was still getting some compensation from the NFL while I was rehabbing. And that was, I'm eternally grateful for that, because it gave me I didn't have a lot of pressure per se for a good period of time to go out there and get a job, just to make ends meet or something like that. So it was a good period of time, and it really helped prepare me for the next ventures that I went into.
Yeah, and you talk about kind of having that time to prepare, and it sounds like you had almost a year. Was there any type of support that you had, whether it was family or was the NFL providing any type of support in terms of helping you transition?
I think they do a lot better job now with players, just because I'm constantly getting communication from them as a retired player, as somebody who's been part of the NFL. And so back then there wasn't a lot of transitional, I would say, help. So it was really my mother was kind of my guiding light, was somebody who I looked to and got a lot of advice from. And So I can't say there was this support network. It was just a few very close friends that I went to school with, and then my mother, and just trying to make some decisions and navigate from there. It was definitely a period of time where you're constantly second guessing yourself because, I felt like, maybe there's still a probability that I could play. How much longer do I want to hang on to this dream and hang on to these goals that I've set? So it was a very interesting period of time because part of me was saying, it's time to move on. It's time to move on with your life. You can't expect to play football forever. But part of me was saying, well, that's what quitters say. That's what, so I had two people on my shoulder giving me different advice as to whether I should continue pursuing the dream, or is that just an unrealistic expectation? So I remember that was tough because every athlete's taught, you never give up, you never quit. It's the last man standing, never give up on your dream. And, being a bubble player, had a couple injuries, I still could play. But it was whether or not I could play at the level that was required to be an NFL athlete.
And did you go directly into, I know you're very involved in the real estate industry now. Was this something that you got into immediately, or was this something that you kind of had a little bit of a meandering path to get to there?
Yeah, I definitely had a meandering path because between my first and second year in the NFL, I started a Mexican restaurant, of all things. That's what all smart NFL players do, is they start Mexican restaurants. And so that was my very first business venture. And I started it on my college campus. And I thought, it's a good idea. There wasn't a quick serve Mexican restaurant there. I felt like the business idea was sound, but I had no financial education. I had no business education. I had no experience in the industry whatsoever. And I was trying to manage it from Chicago, from afar. And that, was a very hard learning lesson for me. In fact, the majority of income that I had made the first couple of years playing, I had invested into that restaurant. And so there were some weeks that we made money. There was a lot of weeks we lost money. That's when I started looking around as I was rehabbing, and I was kind of flying back and forth from the facility to the restaurant to, I was really starting to think there's got to be a better industry. There's got to, I got to take a different approach in whatever pursuits I take. And so it was a question of, okay, do I go get a job working for somebody else? Do I go do what some of my peers had done and work in finance, or go to New York City, or do I want to take a different path and start my own business? And ultimately, while I was at that restaurant working, night and day, and still continuing my rehab on my knee, I would also spend a lot of time studying real estate. And so I was more patient with my decision to get into real estate investing. And so actually, after I was fully done rehab and I'd made the mental commitment that I was no longer going to pursue playing football, that's when I was then just trying to figure out, okay, what do I really enjoy? Do I want to try to turn this restaurant around and really make a career out of this? Or do I want to get into something that I feel like has a much higher probability of success and longer and just greater financial opportunity? And so I started transitioning my time, and actually we ended up selling the restaurant. And then I transitioned into real estate investing full time, and have been doing it now for 15 years, and have loved I can't say every second of it, but I take a tremendous amount of passion in what we do and what we've done for 15 years.
Yeah, that's so great. And I love your story about how you found real estate. And I think one of the important takeaways is kind of your self-awareness, right? Like the self-awareness to understand that maybe my football career is coming to an end right now. And is it worth it to kind of pursue this, this path and to continue to go down this path? And you kind of did the same thing with your restaurant. I mean, it sounds like, you're excited about it at first, but eventually made the decision that, this isn't my path. Got the chance to find this pretty early on in your transition. Was there any other challenges that you were going through at this time, whether it was, the physical changes that were going on in your body from not playing anymore? Or were there any other mental challenges aside from trying to figure out what you were passionate about?
It was my first business was a very humbling experience. And I think it's an important lesson that I'd share. I was overly optimistic. I think a lot of athletes, we become overly optimistic as we continue to progress, the higher levels that we go. We think that, this was absolutely me. I thought, oh, just because I had succeeded in one area of my career, that I'd be able to do the exact same thing in a completely different area, starting a business. And I was humbled, and it was a very humbling experience and a great experience, having a failed first venture, because I realized what I didn't know. And I realized that, gosh, who am I to think, people that get into business, just like an athlete dedicates 10, 15, 20 years of their life building their athletic foundation and refining their skill sets and then getting great coaching. And you'll see this with a lot of athletes. They'll think that, because they've excelled in one area, that all of a sudden they can jump over into another area and excel. And that's just not the case. It's the same process. You have to learn. And so when I had that business failure, it really opened my eyes to the value of education, the value of financial education, the value of, and I even though I went to a great school, I didn't really take education and the educational process as seriously as I should. Looking back, I would have, I'd advise myself to pay attention more in school. And, for me, school was it was a means to a degree. I just wanted the diploma. I don't think I actually wanted to learn anything while I was in college. I just wanted the diploma because I felt like the diploma would get me to whatever that next step was in life, as opposed to what you actually learn. A degree is meaningless. It's what you learn while you're in college that's the most important, because in business, it's just an accumulation of everything you've learned. And so that failure actually made me a student for the first time in my life, believe it or not. It made me realize I need and want to learn how to run a business. And I need to study people that have done it before and pay attention this time around. So I think that was, one of the biggest lessons I had from that venture.
Yeah. And I think a lot of athletes and even myself can identify with that. I wasn't particularly an athlete in college, but, just you're kind of there, you're going, I don't want to say going through the motions, but you don't quite understand the importance of taking that very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And I want to stick on this just for one more question. For the athletes that are out there and maybe thinking about starting a business, what advice would you give them? Because I understand that you can't replace the experiences that you had, and I'm sure those directly led you to a lot of the successes you had in real estate. But if you could give advice to those athletes that are thinking about starting a business, what advice would you give them?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is you want to spend a lot of time getting a very sound financial education, studying finance, studying business and entrepreneurship. It's very much, it requires a tremendous amount of education, I think, to be successful in any business or any industry. And you want to learn from people who have done it, people in that industry that you're pursuing, that have a track record of success and are willing to give their time in some way, shape, or form. And, whether that's finding a mentor or a coach, or finding someone that is a peer group that you can share ideas with, finding mastermind groups where there's groups of business owners in that industry that are willing to share best practices. And those were all things, I started going to educational seminars. I started taking online classes. I started going to I was piecing together. I wasn't focused on, any sort of certification or the degree anymore. I was actually focused on, what do I need to know? Where are the gaps in my knowledge? And so because I was pursuing real estate, I said, okay, well, I have to study finance. I have to study the lending industry. I got to understand how people raise capital. And so as opposed to trying to go out there and get a specific degree, I just said, these are all the areas of the business that I need to study and learn, from finding opportunities to running pro formas, doing due diligence. These are all classes I need to take in my journey to have a complete education. And I was focused on the process this time, as opposed to, a degree or a certification. I personally felt that if somebody's disciplined enough, you can get an MBA. Now, it doesn't work for most people, and I wouldn't say this is great advice for most people, because structures of getting an MBA I think are great. But if somebody's truly self-motivated, you can go out there and through non-traditional learning or, educational events and conferences, you can assemble a lot of the knowledge that you need to be successful. And then just finding people that can help you along the way and provide guidance and almost act like a board of advisors is great advice I'd give to anyone who's transitioning.
Yeah, I think it's a great message to give to athletes, whether they're still in their sport or transitioning, because you're right. Like, the people that you surround yourself with and that you can learn from is so incredibly valuable. And I think a lot of times, especially in sports, we're put on teams. We don't really get to choose who's surrounding us. And that's one of the big things as you transition is you're going to have to create a new peer group. You're still going to obviously have your friends, but if you're going into a business, whether it's the restaurant business or real estate, you want to have people around you that have been there, experienced a lot of those things that you're about to go into. So I think that's a great message to share with athletes.
Yeah, it elevates your game. It's no different than if you're an elite basketball player, you want to play on the best AAU teams, when you're in high school and be around athletes that are better than you. And it's the same thing in business or finance or whatever pursuit, or if you're going the corporate route and you want to work your way up the corporate ladder, finding those chief executives who you can surround yourself and give you strategic advice, I think is critical to your long-term success.
Yeah. And you made another great point too. Not everybody's going to be open to being friendly with you or taking the time to mentor you. And that's okay. You're looking for the ones that are looking to help. And that's kind of like what I always tell myself whenever I'm trying to connect with people is you might have to reach out to 10, 20, 30 people to get 2 or 3 legitimate connections. And that's perfectly fine. That's part of the game.
Very true. You're absolutely right.
You transitioned to real estate. You've started several companies in the real estate business. And I just want to know, from your competitive background, you keep going back and talking about the process. And I really like this because I think, being process driven is so much more critical than being results oriented. So I just want to hear from you and just understand, like, what type of transferable skills do you think that you take from your playing career that you currently use in running your companies in real estate today?
I think athletes, you have a tremendous gift in that you are basically rewarded for what you did today. And that process of, going through losing seasons and winning games and losing games and having to get up every single day and produce is very applicable to the business world. I mean, being an entrepreneur, starting your own company, you're only compensated, you're based on what you did today. You're only as good as your last game, only as good as your last play. And so that process, having done that for, I don't know how many years, since playing sports since 4 to 20, in my mid 20s, I guess over 20 years, that process is extremely valuable because you learn how to deal with adversity. You learn how to deal with, in real estate, a deal falls apart, a contractor walks off the job, and you're only as good as your last transaction in real estate. You're only as good as your last investment. And that's very applicable to what we do as athletes. So, waking up every day and competing. I mean, I think what I loved about sports was the competition. I loved the competition. I loved winning. I loved losing. I loved, that feeling of having that low and then saying, well, gosh, the only way I can fix it is next Saturday or next Sunday. by my performance and by our team's performance. And so those skills are very applicable because any industry, any business is competitive. You will have people that are trying to take market share from you. You have people that are trying to compete on the same investment opportunities, and those skills are invaluable for athletes. We have a lot of athletes that work in our organization, and they tend to be more competitive. They tend to want to achieve, and those things help tremendously. And a direct parallel would be if somebody's in sales. You're only as good as your last sales call. You're only as good as your last day and your last week. And every week or every month or every year, your commission structure starts over again, right? You start at zero. I think a lot of those skills have transferred to what we do in investing and what we do in real estate.
Yeah, this is important for athletes to understand. And you mentioned responding to adversity, the competitive aspect, the work ethic. Athletes understand what it takes to be successful. And I think a lot of times early on in the transition, they don't quite understand that that is a huge value that they can provide to companies. It's really hard to find people these days that have that type of work ethic or have the ability to really face that adversity head on. And athletes naturally have this. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of hone in on, especially as you transition, and whether you're looking for a new job and interviewing with companies, or whether you're starting your own business, is understanding that you have these innate skills that a lot of people would be very jealous of. And it's just part of who you became throughout your athletic career.
Your measure, your performance is very visible. And having to deal with when that visibility is up to par and below par is a significant skill that transfers very well to any job, to any career. And dealing with that, that's why I think my son's in little youth sports, but I always tell my wife it's great for him to lose. It's great for him to learn that process of having to bounce back up, not give up, not quit, go out there the next time and compete against the same team you just lost to. And that process is very transferable to every aspect of life. I mean, that's what your marriage is. That's what your personal relationships are. Are you putting in the work and the time to improve them, or are they getting worse?
We're talking a lot about kind of the early part of your transition, and just want to kind of focus on kind of what you're doing now. Had a lot of success with your real estate company, Fortune Builders. I know you have a couple of nonprofits that you're involved in. And so I just want to know, how do you think you've changed as a person since your playing career?
Definitely have had to develop my leadership skills a lot because, being an athlete, if you're one of the better players, you're naturally kind of looked at as a leader. That doesn't mean you're a great leader. You might be great at what you do, and you might set the pace, but whether you're actually helping your teammates get better and being a true leader, or are you out there just playing to improve your stat sheet? And so I think, when I got into starting companies and hiring people, I don't really think I had a tremendous leadership skill set yet. I had some natural inclinations where I could set the bar, I could work harder, I could work longer, and I could set a great example, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're the best leader yet. And so that was one of the things that I had to really spend time learning is how to be more empathetic with people who didn't have the same background or experience. For me, it was just do the damn work, get the job done, but not everyone responds to that type of message. And so learning to develop some of those softer skill sets, which I'm still working on. My wife would tell you I still need more classes, but that's definitely something that learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to lead and hear other people and hear what they're doing. And because everyone responds differently, and figuring out, it's kind of like a puzzle. You're figuring out the human puzzle. You're figuring out what motivates this person and what motivates this person, and how is this person gonna fit into your organization, even if they're a little different? How's a writer going to fit in with an analyst, and how's an analyst going to fit in, with somebody who's in management versus somebody who's in sales, and making sure that all these people can play in the same sandbox. It's a people puzzle, a lot of it, and figuring out how to get everyone rowing in the same direction when everyone is so different.
So you talked about specifically the leadership skills and the people skills, and being more empathetic. How do you go about teaching yourself this? Is this through books? Are you talking to mentors? Do you seek out, I know you mentioned earlier that early on in your career, you did like educational seminars. So I'm just curious kind of some of the practical tips that you can give athletes in terms of developing some of these skills.
Yeah. One of the books I read that I've reread 3 times really introduced the concept, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It was written many years ago. It's kind of the cornerstone of, I would call it, understanding the people puzzle in business. It's probably the best book. So that opened my mind to it. Now, I've read many books since then. I've read many leadership books. I've been to some different leadership conferences. So those things have all helped. I would say the biggest help are the people within my company, though. I have 2 business partners. I have some really great executives who, when I'm driving too hard or not communicating in a certain way, are I would say aware enough to and brave enough to let me know when I'm not doing something correctly, or I'm not communicating correctly, or make me aware of that. My wife has been instrumental. She's, I bounce advice off her, and she always gives me a different perspective. And so there's been a couple people within my company that I think I've learned the most from, just watching how they interact and seeing, oh, I see, that's a better approach than what I did last month with this particular situation or a different situation. So it's just paying attention to people who do it very well. There's certain people that are magnetic. I mean, their personality is motivating. They hear other people. They listen. They've learned to control their ego and make it about the organization, or make it about the other person more than it is about themselves. And so those are things that I definitely had to learn.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about what you're talking about is really the ongoing process of continuing to learn. Mm-hmm. You're not just really kind of going by on, like you said, the transferable skills you learned from your playing career. Those are great. That gave you a great foundation, but you are continuing to seek out books and people and get advice from those that surround you. Yeah. And really doing your best to continue to raise your level of performance and leadership. And I just love that. And I think, again, a great message for athletes to hear, that it doesn't end when you leave your playing career. You have to continue to develop in your new career. And like you talked about, being a leader and all of these skills that you kind of have to develop.
Not all athletes, but I think a lot of athletes are overly optimistic that because they had such personal success in whatever individual or team sport, that it's going to apply to something else. I personally think your coaching staff is going to have a great example of what to follow. A head coach is only as good as the other coaches that he surrounds himself with the organization that he builds. So, a head coach going out into the business world, I think, would have a lot more success than an individual athlete, because they've been conditioned to really build the best team around them, who can execute and lead other, technicians. Athletes are the technicians, and the coaches are the managers and the executives. And so I think, a coaching background, if any athlete during their athletic career has the opportunity to coach a youth team, I think is a very valuable lesson that will be as transferable to the business world, because they'll realize that the different skill sets required to be successful. Because it's not just, you've always been the star, you've always been a great player, and it's now about building the organization and the people around you that really make your business or your investment successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, now you're getting me on the coaching path, and I could literally sit here for the rest of the day and have this conversation, but I 100% agree with you. Just want to kind of wrap up here and really just kind of get your perspective on, if you could go back in 2003 and talk to yourself and just give yourself one piece of advice on preparing for the transition, what would you tell yourself?
I tell myself to pick a better major. I think a lot of athletes, myself included, I was focused on the degree. So what was the easiest thing that was going to get me the degree? The piece of paper on the wall that you keep on the wall for the first 2 years of your career, and at some point you probably take off your wall. But pick something that's going to be transferable to your second best interest. Athletics is probably going to be your first interest, your first love. Well, what is it, if you weren't going to be an athlete, that you think you would enjoy the most, and pick something that is going to be very applicable and helpful to that. So I would have taken more business classes, more economics classes. I did political science because I felt like it was easy. I had a couple teachers that I enjoyed that, really led me down that path, but I wasn't going to be in politics. I wasn't going to, do anything that was centered around political science. So why did I choose that? So I would tell a lot of athletes, be more intentional and less degree focused and more learning focused on skills that you feel like will really transfer to what you would do next, and think about it earlier. Back then I wasn't thinking about it. I was overly optimistic. I want to play football for a couple of years, and that's going to help me, financially. That's like such a small percentage of people can make an actual significant living in athletics. And even at the highest levels, it's such a small percentage. Yet there's so many people in business or finance or entrepreneurship who have made significantly more money. I made more money investing in real estate in 1 year than I did in my entire athletic career. So I think about, I would give myself better advice to be more intentional about what you study, learn to love the process of learning, and not just to focus on the piece of paper you get at the end of 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end. And, Than, I really appreciate you really sharing your story and really sharing a little bit of the challenges. And, you've had this incredibly successful career since you've left your football playing days, but yet I really appreciate your transparency and kind of sharing with us, it is a process, and it is ongoing, and just kind of understanding that continuing to learn, continuing to set high standards for yourself is really one of the keys that's kind of translated into a lot of the success that you've had. So I really appreciate you joining us today.
No, thank you. I appreciate you having me. And for everyone listening or watching from around the globe, I wish you the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you guys soon.